Good morning, everybody, and happy Wednesday. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us for our Okta webinar series. My name is John Moser, practice lead for network and security for AE Business Solutions, local systems integrator out of the Wisconsin area. Joining me today is Sergey Zvitovsky, senior solutions engineer with Okta. Today we'll be covering Okta's lifecycle management capabilities within the Okta product suite. From an agenda perspective, we'll be going through an overview of the lifecycle management components of Okta, and then I'll be handing things over to Sergey for a demo of the lifecycle management capabilities within Okta. Near the end, we'll save a couple of minutes for questions and answers. So if there are things that you would like to see addressed or things that you have questions about, feel free to use the Q&A capabilities within Zoom, and we'll happily answer those questions either as we go throughout the overview and through the demo, or at the end as we take additional questions and answers. So to begin, this webinar series is presented by AE Business Solutions. We're a local systems integrator and VAR based out of the Wisconsin area. We've been in business for over 70 years, celebrating our 70th year anniversary last year. Headquartered in Madison with offices in Milwaukee, the Fox Valley area, and the Wausau area. We have an engineering first organization from a systems integration perspective, meaning that we have a strong technical team of solutions architects and engineers that lead our integrations practice. We consider ourselves innovative in the enterprise space, trying to lead with technologies that help our customers reduce cost and adopt new capabilities in a much quicker fashion compared to traditional enterprise technologies. Of course, client satisfaction is our top priority. So if you are an AE customer, hopefully you can attest to this, that we are your advocate. And we thank you for spending some time with us on this webinar today. Amongst AE's solutions integrations practices, we have three key areas, centers of excellence, the network and security portfolio that I represent, and obviously that Okta is a key component partner of that. We have a data center practice that covers things such as compute, virtualization, et cetera, and a business intelligence practice. And of course, underlying all of that is our services delivery capabilities, ranging anywhere from staff augmentation, contract to hire through our workforce management organization, as well as other areas such as managed services and professional services offerings to round out the integration practice that AE represents. So what brings us today to this webinar is lifecycle management. So lifecycle management at any organization is filled with a lot of challenges. First, there's a proliferation of users, devices, and applications, and all of that needs to be connected. And different users, such as employees and contractors, have very different life cycles. Secondly, decision-making isn't just contained within IT organizations these days. You have a lot of business application owners who manage applications and who decide on who gets access. And thirdly, legacy identity management solutions frequently have problems challenging or handling today's cloud challenges. If we look at the challenge overall, and if you drill into kind of the technical details of lifecycle management, we quickly find that onboarding and offboarding users is very complex. So we typically use terms like joiner, mover, and leaver to describe the steps in managing users' life cycles. In the joiner phase, in this example, a user gets created in a source system, for example, like an HR system or a directory service, or in some cases, even self-created accounts. And frequently in the joiner phase, we want to automate the granting of birthright access as much as possible. So think of the applications somebody might get access to on day one, things like email applications, storage, and even payroll applications. In the mover phase, you need to account for all sorts of different scenarios. So promotions, job changes, profile changes like marriages and last name changes, and even temporary leaves of absence all affect access. And of course, every organization has their own policies for these things, which frequently makes things like a cookie cutter approach very difficult to use in those sorts of environments. And finally, in the leaver phase, how do you handle when people leave? Is it immediate or is it a scheduled revocation of access? Does the terminated user lose all access, or maybe we should leave them with some sort of time-bound access to something like a payroll system? And again, every organization frequently has their own policies for these, and that's what often makes lifecycle management challenging. So if we look at what typical onboarding of employees looks like today, let's look at a common onboarding scenario to understand sort of where things typically break down. So in many organizations, the HR department frequently is the authoritative source of truth. They're typically the first ones to record a new hire's data. They're also the first one to record that an employee has been terminated. So frequently it makes sense for IT, in order for IT to drive actions such as provisioning applications from HR signals. But the problem typically is that HR commonly notifies IT about onboarding and offboarding events in manual ways. So think they file a ticket, or they send an email, or in some cases they're transferring file dumps for large number of employee changes. And frequently, of course, this is manual, it's disconnected, and it's often unsynchronized. So typically, with most organizations, we see that manual onboarding just really doesn't scale, and it's painful for several reasons. So manual provisioning of accounts isn't efficient, not only inefficient, but it's also error-prone. And typically, when with these error-prone processes that are used to assign access to applications, that can result in security issues, accidental granting of access to applications somebody shouldn't have access to. Additionally, the pain only generally grows as your organization grows. So a manual process often overburdens the IT and the HR organization. And if you're only onboarding a few new employees a week with just maybe 1 or 2 applications, maybe you can get away with those manual processes. But as you onboard more employees and give them access to more applications, the pain becomes pretty unbearable. And finally, the productivity loss isn't just limited to your IT teams. These processes have effects on the end users who can't do their work if resources and apps aren't provisioned in a timely fashion. So let's begin with a couple key areas here. And let's see the ways in which we can use lifecycle management to improve these processes. So the first concept that we'll talk about is called a single source of truth. So in the vision of a single source of truth should really have 3 key capabilities. First, you need to be able to connect to any system of record, such as an HR system like UltiPro or Workday. And this allows you to automate your HR-driven joiner, mover, leaver events. Additionally, it should also provide a cloud-native directory that can be used to store any identity, such as employees, contractors, and customers. And finally, that single source of truth should provide a simple way for you to sync identity data down to your applications. Not only does this include the synchronization of user and group membership, but also additional identity metadata with support for custom schemas. And of course, you should be able to do this through a fully supported management API for ease of integration. So again, here's an example of Okta operating as a single source of truth. We're ingesting a variety of forms of identity data from multiple different locations, including HR systems, Active Directory domains, and other LDAP directories. And regardless of whether the identity is initially mastered in Okta or another HR system, Okta can still act as the single source of truth for all the identity integrations in your company. If we look at some of the out-of-box integrations, as I mentioned, Okta not only supports many of the most common on-prem directory sources, but also numerous cloud HR offerings and other systems of record. And regardless of whether the application you need to support is in the cloud or in your private data center, Okta truly lets you connect everything regardless of the location that it's at. But of course, identity synchronization isn't just about the integrations. One thing I'd like to point out is that we typically find that both providers and consumers of identity regularly provide or consume identity metadata in many different formats. Username field in one system might be presented as a completely different field in another. And this is why a single source of truth needs to support the ability to map and transform the various identity attributes that we might need in your various applications. So next we'll cover the automation of user lifecycle. So Okta's lifecycle management solution aims to automate the joiner, mover, and leaver processes. So in this diagram, Okta sits between HR and your IT environments. Okta talks directly to your HR application and provisions and deprovisions accounts to all apps on the right. But just as easily, if you want Okta to master from, say, Active Directory instead, you can configure that as well. So that is bidirectional depending on how you want your identity mastering process to flow. Okta's lifecycle management product really makes it easy to handle those joiner, mover, and leaver processes. It can handle all types of users whose life cycles are managed differently. So for example, an employee's life cycle might be tightly coupled to an HR system, But for instance, a contractor's lifecycle might require policies that can set things like an automatic end date. Lifecycle management can also drive access based off of users' context. For example, it can use info about users' department or region to provision access differently. And finally, lifecycle management can also automate the process of requesting application access and getting approvals and automating that full workflow. So next, let's talk about application connectors. Kind of one of the core things that we're talking about today isn't just identity, but also the applications that we might be using. So in the Okta environment, we can provision to literally hundreds of different applications. This includes both user provisioning and deprovisioning, as well as group synchronization. The Okta Integration Network, or OIN, as we refer to it, has seen massive growth since inception. Okta has created more than 60 plus provisioning integrations, in addition to hundreds of applications that also utilize, for instance, the SCIM protocol for just-in-time provisioning. And lastly, many of Okta's technology partners are also building solutions for integrating various on-prem applications as well, because not everything is in the cloud. If you have a chance, and if you haven't looked at the Okta Integration Network catalog lately, you can find that at okta.com/integrations. It's got a new look and feel, pretty snappy. It's got some improved searching capabilities. And of course, there are many more integration types that are being added frequently as well. So last but not least, let's talk about visibility and reporting. So one of the most painful parts of responding to an audit has historically been the collection of identity audit trails. With Okta, you can simply simplify the reporting process and remove a lot of that pain, because a lot of that information, again, is collected as a single source of truth. Report data can contain what current permissions assignments users may have, what applications they may have access to, but it can also show recent changes in application assignment as well. Maybe a user was temporarily granted access to an application, but it was revoked for whatever reason. That entire historical trail can be recorded in one place and makes it very easy to report on and provide that data to auditors. And of course, there's other extended benefits to Okta's lifecycle management platform as well. So with Okta, you can provide your organization many benefits. As we discussed, you see a large improvement in productivity, while providing secure access to those applications as well. And of course, Okta's strong reporting capabilities, as we discussed, will ease the burden of audit and compliance requirements. So with that, it's demo time. I'd like to introduce everybody to Sergey Zvitovsky. Sergey will be providing a demo of the Okta lifecycle management components. And I'm going to stop my screen share here, Serge, and hand it over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate that. That was a great overview. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning and giving us a little bit of your time to kind of run through this. I will be sharing my screen here in a second and walking you through kind of just a quick demonstration of what this looks like in the real world, right? Just bear with me here for a moment. Okay. All right, so just a quick orientation to what we're looking at here. So this is just my Okta demo tenant here. This is, I got lots of different applications integrated, lots of different sources of truth. For this particular demo and this particular example here today, I'm going to be doing in kind of a HR-driven scenario that we typically see most common with our enterprise customers and their HR departments, right? So particularly for this demo, I'm choosing to use Namely as my HR tool. That is simply because I have access to it, honestly. But Okta in general with lifecycle management supports many of the most popular tools such as Workday, Multi-Pro, Bamboo HR, SuccessFactors, namely what you're going to see here, and many others. And also, that being said, if everything else fails, there's a HR tool that for some reason Okta doesn't support yet. We always can fall back on something as simple as a CSV file that Okta can look at and import and export users from. So for this example here, I'm going to run through a few processes here. I'm gonna hire a new employee. I'm gonna show what that process looks like. I'm gonna show you what the import and account creation process looks like in my Okta tenant. And also I'm gonna show you guys what happens downstream. So applications that are integrated with my Okta tenant will also be provisioned. Those users will be pushed out to those applications, a few of them. On top of that, also, I have my Okta tenant also tied with my Active Directory, on-prem Active Directory as well, and I will show you what the provisioning process there looks like as well, right? So again, the entire point of this is to show that the HR and IT processes don't have to be as manual, as complicated as they have been in the past. There doesn't have to be emails from HR to IT notifying of new users starting. There doesn't have to be kind of manual processes for updating users and updating information. Everything can kind of flow together in an automated, simple way, starting with HR and then flowing down through Okta, through IT, and then flowing all the way down to the downstream applications that every employee needs access to. Right, so this is kind of typical. Your Active Directory accounts for simple login into your Windows machines, to email addresses, and then your particular role-based tools that you may need access to. So what I'm also going to be showing here is kind of a specific level of access designed for each individual role that this new hired user can hold. Right. So with that being said, let me just go ahead and hire a new person here in Namely, and you guys will have to just bear with me for one moment. I've done a lot of jobs in my life, but HR is not one of them. So this just might be a little bit slower than I wanted to, but just bear with me. Hopefully this is not very painful. So hiring Serge Jawatowski 9 here, full-time employee. Job title is going to be IT analyst for this particular example. Start date, I'm going to backdate it so that user gets created right away. I'm going to create some random data here for the user, give it an email address. Type in the personal information so that I can continue to receive notifications before the mailbox is created and I have access to it. If you guys want to send me funny pictures of your cats, by all means, go for it. Date of birth, just going to pick a random number and also put some random stuff for the social security number. I'm going to leave a lot of this stuff blank here because it's just simply not necessary. Depending on your HR processes and your kind of internal business processes, you can or you don't have to use some of these fields that Namely provides. And every kind of HR system has a different approach to this. But the important thing to keep in mind here is that even though I'm not using these fields, you can use them, and then the data will still continue to flow into Okta. The data will be populated in the user's account, and then every downstream system that the account gets pushed into will also reflect the same data stemming here from the HR system that I'm using. So just to continue down here, I'm going to kind of leave this and only fill out the critical portions here. So phone number, address. Appreciate your patience. Okay, yep, this is the right address, okay. And that should be it, right? So some basic information about this user, some kind of role-based information. So this is an IT user here that I'm creating. Obviously, my Namely tenant here has some very basic options. I'm sure your HR system is much more advanced and developed with many different types of role, including anywhere from analyst to manager and everything in between. So yours might look a little bit different, but this is just to show you kind of what it at the fundamental level, what it does and how it looks, right? So let me just create this user real quick here. And here we go, right? So users created, this is a new hire. It's already started. Some basic information about the profile that I've entered. So IT analyst, phone number, employee number, email address, personal email address, stuff like that. And their home address as well. Right. So this user now uses a name. So at this point, I'm going to switch back to my Okta tenant and show you kind of how this looks from the Okta perspective. So For this particular portion, like I said, I'm using namely here, and what I also want to point out is here though is that I'm going to be doing this. I'm gonna click this import now right here. I am doing this kind of in slow motion to show you kind of what happens in all the processes. Typically, in a production deployment, this would all be automated, right? So you'll still have the ability to do a manual import from namely if you need to, but in the most typical situation where this is deployed in production, you have many users, many changes and additions and changes to the namely environment and database. This will all be happening behind the scenes automatically. I don't want anybody to leave this webinar thinking that in order to make this work, every time there's a new user added or a change to a user's profile, last name change, or anything like that, you would have to go in here and click import now. That is simply not the case. I'm just doing that for demo purposes. So you can see that Okta has reached out to namely via APIs, has communicated, has seen that there's been a change, a new user has been added, has been hired into my company, and is now able to bring that user with all their profile information into Okta. So here we go. One additional step here. Again, this is just, I'm doing this manually, but you guys would not be doing this manually in production, is I'm going to manually just confirm this user here and activate them. And this just takes a second. Okay, so now that that's done, right? So namely, so Okta has communicated with namely, has seen that change, has been able to grab that user record from an HR system, has now been able to import it into my Okta tenant. Let's just go ahead and switch over to this tab and find that user. There we go. And this is what the user record looks like, right, in Okta. So for those of you who are not familiar with Okta, this is kind of the typical administrative function and view into user record here in Okta. The kind of important things to look at here is the profile information. Again, so this is everything that's coming from namely, right? So the things you saw me type into the new hire record there are visible here in Okta as well, right? So title of IT analyst, display name, email, stuff like that, the profile URL. So this is my namely record here as well. So my secondary, my personal email here is as well, my phone number that I've added, and the address that I put into the namely record. So everything exists here in this in Okta. And the other important thing to notice here is that just by being added to Okta, I already have access to some applications, right? So these are the applications that this particular user has access to right from the start. Because this is a IT user, they have your kind of birthright access application, so Office 365. So they have a mailbox that's been created for them right away here by Okta automatically. They have some access that are assigned to everyone that they might get. And they have an application that's specifically assigned to only IT users. So this is AWS. So this person might be an infrastructure or networking or security person. They're going to need access to my cloud AWS instance due to their role, and that happens behind the scenes automatically. And I'll go through and show you exactly how that's done here in a moment. Additionally, what I want to point out is that while this user was created here in Okta and pushed out to these downstream applications, there is also a record that's created in Active Directory. Let me just pull that up really quick. And drag that over. So what you'll see here is this Surge9 user that was created here in my ED. This is my on-prem ED. And if I go into that record as well, you will notice that the same information that was entered into namely has been added to Okta, and then through Okta has been the record has been created in AD with the same profile attributes as well. So again, email address, my namely profile URL is here. My address has been populated in this record as well. My phone number has been added, and I believe, yes, the organizational info here is here as well, right? So now this is a fully functional ED user that has been created, and that fully automatically, right? So again, no interference or interaction from the IT team. This has happened kind of real time, behind the scenes. Everything's happened, and it all started from my HR system. So very nice. No need for emails from HR to IT. No need for a shared Excel document or post-its from HR to IT to get this all to happen. It happens in real time, and it works very well, right? So now that this user is here in Okta and in Active Directory, they were able to start working almost immediately here because all their access provisioned, at least the basic stuff for the applications that are not that this user does not have access to just yet, but may need to at a later time. Okta actually offers a kind of a request uh, um, option as well, so the user can actually has a choice of a catalog that they can request an application, so that if there is an application that this user needs that they don't have access to due to their role or by birthright, but it is something they still need access to, for example, Box or something similar to that. Okta actually does give you a self-service way to request access that goes through an approvals workflow, and then eventually the access provision by Okta automatically as soon as the approver hits the approve button. So for this particular example, I'm keeping it really simple to just a few applications and with matching the role of the user. And speaking of the role here, the next scenario I'm going to go through is kind of the mover scenario, right? So Serge here was hired as an IT analyst. He's done this job for a little while, but is kind of tired of getting those late night phone calls, the pressure, being on call and dragging laptops around. I personally can attest to that. And so Serge wants to switch roles, right? He's very talented and just is able to do some different stuff. So he wants to just give something else a try here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back into my Namely environment, and I'm going to actually modify this person and switch the roles, right? So when they started out as an IT analyst, but now I'm going to make him a marketing person. I'm going to save that. So now this user has taken on a new responsibility, taken on a new role with the company, and is been adjusted in the HR system once all the paperwork is approved and the change is official, right? So again, I'm going to follow kind of a similar process here. So again, I'm going to go back into my Okta environment, into my Namely application here, and I'm going to do kick off one more sync here. Again, just want to reiterate this. I'm doing this manually, but typically this all happens automatically, so you will not have to do this. This just happens behind the scenes. You'll see that Okta has notified me that one existing record has been updated. This is reflecting that change made in my HR environment. Okta has picked up that change during the sync process and has changed the user record to reflect that change from HR. So going back to the user record itself in Okta, I'm going to look at the profile here. You'll see that my title has changed from IT analyst to marketing. And at the same time, everything else, I haven't changed anything else. So pretty much everything stays the same. But just for your information, basically, if I had to change a last name or email address or my home address needed to be changed, any of those changes will be reflected here in the user profile. And at the same time, push downstream to those applications that the user was provisioned to earlier during the account creation process itself. One more thing I want to point out here is that before, since Serge originally got hired as an IT person, but has switched roles to a marketing person, you will now notice that where Serge had access to AWS in the past, because that's what he needed for his job, to do his job, he no longer needs that access to AWS being in marketing, right? So that access, because of that change, that AWS access was revoked automatically and then replaced by something that's more marketing specific, right? So for this example, I'm just using a Salesforce as a marketing type of application. It's just an example of an application and a kind of a change cycle there. Picture any application that is relevant, that is used in your environment, and you can have that going here as well. Again, using some very simple examples here with just a few apps. Typically, when I see this, there's multiple applications, 20 or 30 applications that the users have access to in their environment. And depending on their role and needs, those will get adjusted depending on the user provisioning and the user's role coming from HR, right? So AWS got replaced by Salesforce, and now this user is officially a marketing person. Again, just going to point this out. Same kind of process. Not only updates the Okta profile, but also updates the downstream profiles into Active Directory. Active Directory is in this situation considered just another downstream application. So that if I go into this user one more time, and let's see, where's there? Yep, the organization profile. So the department and the job title has been adjusted from IT analyst to marketing. And again, fully automated, no friction here, no messing around, no going in manually into your directory user store and manually making these changes, kind of waiting for that replication to happen. None of that. You can, what this nice thing about this and what this allows you to do is limit the access for users, for your IT administrators to your Active Directory, right? So if you no longer need to be making these kind of manual adjustments in your Active Directory, you can very much limit the number of users that have kind of write access into AD and the scope of it as well. So get those manual changes out of there. Those are notoriously hard to audit and control, and always expose you to some level of risk. With Okta, we aim to kind of reduce that threat surface, allow this automation to happen, reduce the kind of error rate of these changes because it is automated. It is not a manual change that happens and is done by a user. So we simplify this and kind of just make it function better. I might close this out. Here we go. So that's kind of the scenario where a user has adjusted roles. So just to summarize again, sorry about that. User hired with one type of information, with one job, has changed jobs. Okta has reflected that change coming from namely, has pushed the changes downstream to applications, and everything is continuing to function great. The user has access to that stuff they need access to for their particular role. Any additional access that falls, is outside of that role, they can request access to manually by themselves as an end user, self-service, or an Okta administrator can always assign another application to them via request or ticket if that's necessary, right? But we try to cover as much as we can with full automation based on these roles, and the teams between HR and IT can kind of decide what access, what level of access, what applications each role needs, right? So the way this is done in the background is through something Okta calls group rules, right? So I'm just going to open up another tab here really quick and go into the rules section here. I have a few rules here, but the important ones are the namely ones at this point, right? So I have namely IT and namely marketing, right? And these rules are constantly being evaluated by Okta, so they're in real time. And it's very straightforward, right? So it's if then and the result. So if particularly for this example, I'm just doing a very simple rule. You can make this as complicated or as simple as you want. I've seen people do just simple title changes, like what I'm doing here is the access level is depending on the title, but you can also do some more complex rules where you can do title in addition to a location, in addition to level of access and stuff like that, and really customize this as much as you can. So it doesn't have to fall into these really big buckets like what I've done for this demo of IT and marketing. There's many different sub teams and sub jobs within each one of those larger organizations. So in IT, you can be a network engineer, you can be a Windows engineer, anything, a security, anything like that. You can further break these down into much more granular scopes. Each one of those roles will have completely different access, and kind of Okta gives you that flexibility to really get down in there and decide what makes sense for you as a business, right? So here for this particular example, I'm just using some really kind of big brain um, um, buckets like IT and marketing, but again, you can break those down as much as you want, right? So these rules are what's kind of driving these changes. As soon as Okta sees that the user's title has changed from IT analyst to marketing, they're added to a completely different group, and the access they get and the applications they get assigned to is driven by those groups. And these groups can be anything from Okta mastered to your Active Directory groups to Workday groups to anything in between. Okta is fully compliant and allows for multiple different sources of truth and sources of records, including groups coming from multiple different sources. If I go into my list of groups here, you'll see that the icon here, the source, is different. So these are Workday groups, these are Office 365 groups. The O is the Okta groups that are created manually here, and somewhere below here where you'll find some Active Directory groups as well. So each one of these groups can be controlled by Okta. We can make changes and modifications to them, add users in and out of them as required. So that's kind of the mover scenario, the second one, and finally the last thing I'll talk through here is the scenario where Serge has jump jobs, still unhappy. He's very hard to please. He's decided to go look for something completely different. Maybe he wants to be a veterinarian or something like that, but outside of this particular organization, right? So I'm just gonna Serge is being terminated for whatever reason, if you voluntary or not. So I'm just gonna do this, set a termination date here. I'm gonna save this count, and I'll run one last import here. Let me go back to my namely. And run that one last sync. Here as while we wait. What is happening behind the scenes, again, is Okta's talking to Namely via the APIs. We've given that access to Okta, and now Okta has reflected that change. So you'll see that the one user has been removed here because the user has been terminated. And then if I go back into the user record for Serge and just do a refresh here, you will notice a couple things here, right? So first of all, the user is deactivated. Right, so that is what that means is effectively they've lost all their access. You also notice that they no longer have any applications assigned to them as a user, right? So not only can they not log into Okta, they also have lost access to the applications that they used to be assigned. And during that process, the Okta actually reaches out to those downstream applications and deprovisions them there as well. So a lot of what I've seen and have experienced personally is that even though users ED account, and there's a good process for that to terminate the user, it might still be manual, but at least that happens. A lot of times what also happens is those downstream applications that the user has access to, IT has no visibility to that. So IT may not know that this user has access to, has a Salesforce account, right? They might not know that they need to go in there and terminate that access for them when they leave. So what you have is a lot of these kind of abandoned records out there in all these downstream applications just sitting there and costing companies money per month for each one of these records just existing when they are not used and they're not able to be used. And then at some point, some kind of a manual cleanup process will kick in, and this could be like weeks or months or even years later, we'll go ahead and clean out those old records. If it's possible, right? The other problem is that some of these records, there's no way to tell if they're being accessed or used without running some kind of a check with various other systems to make sure the employee is still considered active. And then if they're not active, then we'll clean it up, stuff like that. So it's a big reconcile that is done typically manually. It's painful, it misses a lot, and ends up costing companies a lot of money for just having access sitting out there every month, just taken away. Some of these licenses, as we all know, are very expensive. The other thing that this really kind of helps you with is is just reducing that threat surface, right? So again, if I have an account, I'm no longer with the company, and for example, if this was a kind of a bad termination, right? So we're leaving on bad terms for whatever reason. Potentially, without cleaning up all my records and all the downstream systems, I may still have access to those systems. So what leaves the organization vulnerable to is me logging back in there after I'm no longer employed and grabbing data, grabbing customers out of Salesforce. Potentially, depending on my access level, I can make changes, potentially kind of bad changes that may screw up the whole system there and just cause a lot of problems as for the company, right? So nobody wants that disgruntled employee to continue to have access when they are no longer employed. So with this, we are able to kind of just automatically remove all that, so you don't have to worry about going into each one of those individual systems. And again, for this example and demo, I've only used a couple applications, but typically what I see is at least 20, 30 applications per user, anything from, everybody has an email account of some sort, either O365 or G Suite or something similar to that. But also many other applications are in play here. It is a painful process to go clean that up manually. So Okta has done a good job of cleaning that up, removing those licenses, getting your money back, not having you pay for stuff you don't use, and then reducing that threat surface as well. One thing I will point out as well is that, again, the change happens in namely my HR tool is then pushed into Okta, and Okta has pushed it downstream to multiple other applications. So Active Directory being one of them, which you'll see here, and it's a little hard to catch, but when I do a refresh here, you'll see that this account now has that little down arrow on it, which means it's disabled. And also you can see go in here if the account is set as disabled. So Okta has actually went in there and disabled the AD account at the same time. So again, completely cut off that access, right? The user can't log in, can't do anything, can't mess up with my environment, can't take proprietary data, can't do any of that. Fully automated, just with the change in namely my HR tool. So that is kind of those three scenarios that we typically talk about for lifecycle management. The change for this example, I use my HR tool, but again, this can be the change can happen stemming from your Active Directory being the first source of truth. It can be multiple other applications. It doesn't have to be HR, but it's just the process is exactly the same. So once Okta is able to reflect that change, is able to notice that change has happened, is then able to kick off processes to either provision or deprovision downstream applications, and then the user is fully ready to go and get on with their job. A couple of last things I want to mention here. This was brought up by John in his presentation, is that everything that happens in Okta and everything Okta does is available in our syslog, right? So for tracking purposes, for compliance, this becomes very important. So if those yearly compliance checks or PCI, anything else, SOX or anything else in there, you can actually go in here and prove to your auditing team that this change has happened and exactly when it happened, right? So everything I've done for this particular demo, for example, here's my delete user process that's happened. Here's my remove user application and membership has happened. You can go in here and find those records, print them out or show them, or however that reporting needs to be done. This all exists in our syslog. So every change that happens in Okta, whether it's an administrator kicks off the process manually, whether it's a third-party system that Okta is integrated, makes that change, everything is logged, right? And these logs, they don't just sit here in Okta's environment. They can be offloaded to your own log collection tools, so your Splunks or any SIM tools you may be using. Also, they are accessible through our APIs as well. You can actually kind of script against them and get the data to look exactly how you want. If you want some really custom reporting done, you can do that. I've done that personally prior to working for Okta. I've accessed this data. And then basically what just has all this information for you at your hands. Our integrations with some of this tools like Splunk is really great. We actually have an Okta app for Splunk, which has some really nice pre-built dashboards, shows you your top users, your kind of your threats that Okta's detected, all your successful and unsuccessful attempts, potentially malicious behavior, frequent, bad passwords, stuff like that. Helps a lot with those lockouts and tracking down the lockouts as well. So a lot of different information that Okta collects. Here you can see that there's a whole bunch of information that is actually being pulled about each one of these events, including simple things like this is me doing this stuff. This is me, collects my location, my environments here, my ISP and stuff like that. So there's a lot of pieces of data that we're grabbing as much as we can to give you guys and the IT teams and security teams as much visibility into the environment as possible. So that's kind of that's the logging part of this. And then one last thing I'll end with this is that it's really great that Okta is able to provision and deprovision these accounts. It's able to modify and make changes to them as changes happen to the user's journey in the organization. But what we've heard over the years is it'd be really great to be able to kick off some additional processes besides just the user being created. So a user is created and added, and their mailbox is created. That's great. That's really great. But what if I also wanted to have some additional processes kick off? For example, I want to have a ticket fired off to ServiceNow asking for a mobile device to be provisioned for this person if the company provides cell phones or something like that, or a certain territory being assigned in Salesforce automatically to the user so that their manager doesn't have to go in there and provision that kind of stuff manually. So some of these additional third party, kind of a secondary and third processes would be really great to have, and further continue that automation journey from the user being created to being really, really set up for success on day one of them starting their company. So they don't have to waste their first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, months potentially, just being able to do their job, just being able to chase down the access that they need, the provisioning that they need, and all the resources, and figure out who owns what and how to get access to what. So with that in mind, Okta has recently released a new tool called Workflows, which I'll show you here right now, to really help with this kind of secondary functionality after the user has been traditionally provisioned to an application. So what Workflows does is it's a code-free approach. It's a visual approach to kind of building these workflows. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? So again, you kind of create you think about what process is important for me as a marketing user or me as an IT user on day one after the account has been created. What is important to also have? Do I need to send an email notification to management or other teams welcoming the person? An automatic way to do that, that's great. Do I have to send a Slack message to my, some IT team that says, hey, this person has joined, please do this for them? That's great. Things like what happens if I'm trying to create a new user in my HR system that already exists. So something like John Smith, and then I'm trying to hire another John Smith, and there's a conflict between the email address I'm trying to assign. So Workflows can handle use cases like that. In fact, I just built one exactly to this is a very common scenario that I hear about a lot. I just built this, and I'm going to show you this is just what a workflow looks like for this particular one is exactly the ID conflict and resolution, what I just mentioned, which comes up all the time. And just really quick to give you a quick orientation, I know we're kind of running short on time here. Every workflow kicks off, starts with a task from Okta. So for particular, this is a user import is what kicks off this workflow. A new user is attempting to be added to Okta. Okta will then take the data from that request, and we will actually run this workflow prior to adding the user to Okta and all downstream applications as well. And what happens here is, like as I mentioned, every one of these steps is, we call them cards, but every one of these steps is a drag and drop pieces of information. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually taking the first name, the last name, I'm combining them. I'm then running that and checking if this is a unique user, if this user already exists in my Okta tenant. And then if it does, if the user the user does not exist, this is the top portion, proceed as normal. Create the user, no problems. There's no conflicts there. But if the user already exists, or that particular username already exists, I head down here to this section below, and this is my resolution section of this particular workflow. So for this particular workflow, what I'm doing here, there's many different options for this, but I'm taking the middle name, taking the first letter of the middle name, I'm appending it to my username. I am then checking that whether that unique, newly constructed username is unique or not, if it already exists. If it doesn't, then I will go ahead and just create the user. If it does, you can put it through a loop and iterate as many times as you want with adding digits, dates, middle initials, multiple letters from the middle name. Anyway, you typically handle these kind of situations. You can have workflow do it, and then it will take care of that kind of situation. So really quick way to kind of at a high level overview what happens in this particular workflow is just some text modification, building that username, some checking of Okta here, and then a kind of a if else type situation. If this happens, proceed. If this happens, make some modifications and then finish up at the end. So this is workflows. It's a very powerful tool. It's able to make native API calls to these third-party applications. We have a lot of applications that are pre-configured with this so that you can just drag and drop different functions like Office 365, send an email is a pre-built card. It's a pre-built function. So you just pull it out. If you want to send an email, you just add the card. It says send email, give it an address and a subject and a body, and tell it to who to send the email to, and then you're good to go. So again, really not really designed for coding or anything like that. It's a visual approach. It's designed so that it can be used by not just your developer types, not just your highly skilled IT teams, but also by your business analyst types as well. Somebody who's good with technology, but not a programmer, not a developer by any means, does not want to be writing API calls manually or code or anything like that. This is exactly what Workflows provides you. So again, just a recent addition to Okta's product catalog, really powerful, great reviews from customers that have adopted it. And it's a big focus on it and developing further features for it, adding additional built-in integrations, and just a powerful tool that's great. With that being said, I believe that is pretty much everything I had for you guys today. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to John. All right. Thank you guys for your time again.
Awesome. Thanks, Sergey. So if you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Feel free to use the Q&A function of Zoom to send out some questions, and we'll get those answered in the last couple of minutes that we have here. I've got one question that came in. Are you able to set, can you set changes to occur at specific dates and times in the future?
Yes, the answer is yes. So different HR systems handle this in slightly different cases. I know Workday does this really well. Namely does this well. I'm not familiar with the other tools, but as far as I know, most common HR systems support that functionality. You can kind of set some additional things you can do is you can kind of pre-hire individuals. Okta will stage the accounts but not activate them. You can set a termination date in the future as well, so that you're not manually terminating the user in the past or at the time of. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
Awesome, thank you. One other question, are there advantages to using Okta as the source of truth versus Active Directory?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we are seeing more and more recently, especially. Folks are trying to get away from Active Directory. There's a cost associated with it, with everybody trying, working remotely. It's making less and less sense with people bringing their own devices and a lot of, Mac laptops like what I'm using. Active Directory just doesn't quite make as much sense as it used to. So with that being said, Okta actually can serve as its own fully functional, extensible directory in the cloud. It's part of it's a fundamental piece of the Okta platform. It's called Universal Directory, and it allows you to do everything that Active Directory allows you to do. So password policies, MFA policies, complexity stuff, assign applications, fully extensible attributes, add your own, modify them at will. So lots of different flexibility there. Absolutely a valid approach.
Awesome, thanks for that answer. Any additional questions while we have a minute or so here? Going once, going twice. Sold. Awesome. Well, we want to thank everybody for their time for joining us today. Thanks, Sergey, for joining us as well. And hopefully everybody has a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, John.